Before we get into today's video, I just thought I'd ask you if you could follow me on Instagram. I put loads of weird memes and video reminders, and just generally loads of other stuff regarding me and psychedelics and interesting crap, so yeah, that would be greatly appreciated. Masters of the Universe, a DMT trip report by Lucid, uploaded to earwid.org October 27, 2016. First, a little background information to provide some context for the trip. This experience was going to be the second DMT experience of my life, and I was extremely excited for it, feeling a definite charge through my body as I picked up the bowl and contemplated the hit and what it was going to do to me. Having just had my first DMT experience 24 hours earlier, I was more than aware of the incredible rush that was going to blast me immediately after the hit, and to be honest, I was a little intimidated by it. During the first experience, I blasted through the veil immediately and was thrown out into this gigantic open space where I was shown innumerable images and events. The emotions I was experiencing in that place were that I was home and that I'd been there so many times before. These were some of, if not the strongest emotions I have ever felt in my life. It had felt like an incredible revelation was thrown in my face, and yet it was the most obvious thing ever to me. I was jubilant. You can easily see from the first trip why I would be so excited for the second. Anyway, to the trip. 6:40 PM. In my friend's lounging room with all the lights off, and with 7 to 8 candles burning, 3 close friends are present, and my mindset all day has been gearing towards preparing for this moment. My previous trip left me with an incredible sense that I needed to trip again, almost as if I was being called back into the DMT lands to be shown more. The DMT is packed in a water pipe, with a thin layer of weed above and below it for a buffer. After taking about 15 minutes to meditate and get myself centered, I decided it is go time. I empty my lungs and lean forward to the pipe. Taking one gigantic hit is the style I have adopted for smoking DMT, and as I released the smoke and leaned back into the couch, reality melted away. It appeared as though I was passing backwards through a portal, total tunnel vision. Simultaneously, I was experiencing or hearing the loudest, most electric shredding sound that I have ever heard or experienced. It must have been the fabrics of time shredding, because after this moment I was no longer in the physical realm. 6:41 to 6:46. This is the part of the trip that I have the most trouble recalling, and it was no doubt the most intense part as well. I distinctly remember the feeling of being home again. I was definitely, no question, in the same place that I'd gone to on my first trip, and even further down the rabbit hole this time. I was feeling the feeling of infinity much stronger than my first trip, and it seemed like I belonged in this realm this time around. I was there for so long. It really cannot be put into words. In fact, my entire trip consisted of 2 distinctly different experiences, one in body and one out of body, but both of which lasted what seemed like an eternity. Unfortunately for me, I do not remember much about what I saw in this place, but what I was able to bring back with me was that I remembered the choice I was given when I left the place. I distinctly remember having the choice to stay in this amazing place for another eternity, or I could return to my body. In fact, up until this point I hadn't even considered my body or this world, but the moment I had the thoughts that the drug would surely be wearing off soon and I'd be returning to my body, my consciousness snapped back into the physical realm. 6:46 to 6:47. Now, this is where the trip really starts getting crazy. At this point, my consciousness is back in the room I had started in with my 3 friends, except that it is not really a room at all. Instead, I noticed that we are kind of floating in this beautifully golden aqueous space, similar to the wavy PS3 background, but in indescribable depth and definition, and I immediately understood this to be the place where reality is constructed from. I try to sense my body, but it's completely impossible and I feel completely separated from it. I look around to try and see my body and I can make out my legs, but they are what seems like many yards down and to the right of me, meaning the point of observation would have been somewhere above my left shoulder in the physical world. I look to my friends, but they do not look like they normally would. I can see who they are perfectly, but instead of bodies they are so abstract that I don't even know what words would do it justice. My friends are clearly having a loud conversation with each other, except that the words make absolutely no sense to me, and they sound like the craziest combination of hundreds of languages. They are radiating this aura of power, and I feel as though I am in the presence of some kind of council, except that they are not there to judge me, but rather to offer support and reassure me. There are many other sounds going on in the room, echoes sounding off in all sorts of different pitches. Everything had an incredibly alien feel to it. I distinctly remember being there and listening to their pure gibberish conversation for a very, very long time, and then out of nowhere it hit me. The mega granddaddy of DMT revelations. Literally as if thunderstruck, I am blasted with this overwhelming emotion that we, meaning myself and my friends in the room, are projecting the reality we know as life together. And even further than that, I can remember feeling the other guy's energy within me, and I was overwhelmed with the notion that we were really all one entity experiencing whatever we want to in the physical realm, like constructing a play for ourselves to enjoy or to learn from. 6:48 to 6:52. It was after this wave of emotion hit me that reality began to melt away, again. It seemed as though the room and my friends' physical existences would not be there when I stopped paying attention to them. But then as soon as I wanted to be back in the room, I could be, and it would rematerialise before my eyes. I continued to toy around with this newfound ability until I was abruptly sucked back fully into the physical world. It was at this point that I opened my eyes and took my first look around the actual room I had started in, and then I realised what was coming next before it even started. You see, during my first DMT out-of-body experience, after my consciousness returned to my body, I went through a spell of about 5 minutes where I was shaking violently and consistently, but all the while I felt immensely calm and even pleasurable. As I predicted, this happened again. For about 6 minutes my entire body vibrated with this incredible energy force that I've never felt besides when re-entering my body on DMT. It is almost like pure ecstasy charging through my body as my soul reinvigorates my flesh. After 6 minutes I settle down into my body, and my skin starts to feel like it's glowing with heat. My head feels supercharged as well. Post-trip rundown. Immediately following the trip, one of my friends had a notebook and pencil handy and decided to start jotting down everything I was rambling on about. This turned out to be an incredible tool when I wanted to go back later and remember certain aspects of the trip, because there are certain key words or emotions in the notes that will trigger entire memories from this trip. It also helped a great deal in making this journal. Really, the main thing I want to discuss from this post-trip conversation I had with my friends is this. As I was explaining to them that I had sat and watched them carry out an alien conversation of gibberish for what seemed like hours, they told me that I had in fact not opened my eyes to watch them at all during my trip, and that they had hardly uttered more than a few words to each other, and when they did, they whispered quietly to not disturb me. This revelation absolutely blew me out of the water. Did this mean I was really watching them all the entire time through my third eye, instead of my physical eyes? Wow. The morning after. This is what I remember most from this entire revelation ordeal. I cannot remember exactly what the revelations that I learned in that place were, but I do remember asking myself during the come down, will they allow me to share the information I just received, or should I keep it to myself? This is a very strange thought, and yet I remember it as being exactly as I worded it here. This tells me that A, clearly I felt the information was almost so sacred that people should discover it for themselves. B, clearly I felt there were other forces that revealed this information to me, and I was questioning whether or not they would want me sharing it. I was very shaken by these revelations when I was in the moment, and not in the sense that I was concerned for my well-being or anything, but rather just completely and utterly blown away by it. I was also very shaken and a little scared when offered the opportunity to leave this reality for eternity. No doubt that is why I'm back here now. However, I was also laughing like a madman on the inside knowing what I had discovered. It's important to remember that regardless of what I say now to try to rationalise or put the trip into terms we can understand through this realm, I was literally the happiest I have ever been in my life while realising whatever I realised in that trip. I also got the sense deep down inside that I wasn't fully ready to abandon our reality just yet. So maybe that indicates that subconsciously I knew I had more to do on this planet yet. But who really knows? Another thing that is interesting to note, the night after this experience I woke up about 5 to 6 times into sort of a half awake, half sleeping state. While in that state I could remember my dreams vividly, and I was moaning while laying in bed in something like ecstasy. Now I can only vaguely remember the dreams, but I've never experienced anything like that before, and I'm convinced my pineal or the DMT had something or a lot to do with it. Anyway, after an experience like this, I have only the highest of hopes in regards to what DMT can show me about myself and the nature of existence. Still longing very strongly to try ayahuasca or changa to get a more lengthy experience, although there is no escape once in the heat of a trip like that. I hope this report helps someone make sense of something they've experienced that is as incredible as my experience was. Happy tripping. Divine Moment of Truth, on Meeting the One. A DMT trip report by Mike M, uploaded to Irwin.org on November 30th, 2011. 1 week ago today I returned home from a weekend trip to Jacksonville, Florida, where I attended a high school reunion of sorts. One of my best friends from high school, who still lives there, picked me up at the station, and on the way to the show, he was tripping over himself with excitement about introducing me to DMT on this particular weekend. He'd planned a camping trip to the beautiful Anastasia Island for the following night, and he prepared for it with 1 gram of DMT to be shared by about 5 people. Prior to heading out on the day of our camping trip, my friend attempted in vain to get me to watch The Spirit Molecule, but wanted to keep an open mind about the experience and felt that I might taint expectations by watching this documentary. Up until that day, my knowledge about DMT was based on hearing a story many years prior about a friend's friend's experience and the subsequent curiosity that led me to the internet to find out what I could about DMT. Vague but unforgettable knowledge lived in my brain for years, and even though I didn't watch the documentary with my friend, he made a case for it and basically lectured me on its ability to connect you to your innermost subconscious mind, as well as with every living creature on the planet and the universe at large, all at once. He spoke of how it healed him and how it helped him quit smoking and drinking cold turkey immediately after his first experience. I was beyond intrigued. Excited and anxious are the best words I could think of for how I felt all the way down to the island. Once on Anastasia Island, we set up camp and started a fire. My friend's cousin put on spangle for us to meditate on for the couple hours before heading over to the beach for our sacred smoke. My friend began a series of yoga stretches and poses, and meditated for what felt to me like forever. I mostly listened to music and played with Epsilon, my friend's giant Newfoundland dog. Once we arrived on the shore over the dunes at about 9:30 p.m, we found ourselves under a bright display of stars with the sounds of the roaring ocean next to us. My friend packed a small bowl with a small amount of sativa and poured about 1/10 of a gram of DMT crystals on top. The mound looked a lot like coarse brown sugar, more golden in hue than brown. He made sure to tell me that I was to burn the entire mound and inhale the biggest hit my lungs were capable of holding. As soon as I burned a little of the DMT, it began to melt, and the smell and taste immediately sent my memory into a chase. I'd smelt or tasted this before. Memories of childhood flooded my mind. My friend quickly refocused me and had me take my real hit. I inhaled deep and burned through all the DMT in the bowl, and I held it in as long as I could. Before exhaling, I started to hear an electronic sound wobbling deep in my ears, and I felt a strong pulsation coursing rapidly through my body. As I exhaled, the wobble raised in pitch and frequency, and I could no longer hold my seated position. I fell back onto a beach towel and my trip began. About 10 to 20 seconds had passed since my first inhalation. As the sound in my head took over and I began to feel like I was losing control of my body, the overwhelming sensation was that of a rocket ship gearing up for takeoff somewhere inside of me. As I fell back, I felt like I'd broken through into my subconscious mind, and the first thing I noticed was the sky opening up in a sped up way. I heard a female voice that seemed to telepathically say to me, "Welcome back." The clouds seemed to swoosh and reveal illegible words, and the blackness of the night sky suddenly turned to many colourful shades of purple and reds. At the same time, I saw moving fractal-like patterns directly above me that were shaped like a vortex type of portal, and what confused me here was that I couldn't tell if I was seeing this inside of my head or in the fabric of my sight field. Once on my back, I opened my eyes and I noticed my friend's cousin was to my left, and my friend was on my right, and I heard him remind me to breathe. As I drew in a breath, the sky got closer, and as I exhaled it, the sky bounced back. I then closed and opened my eyes, and suddenly my friend's cousin was an Aboriginal man, and the colours of the sky behind him were now orange. I sensed that I was in a vast desert, and that I was receiving messages from people of different cultures. I closed my eyes again, and my friend's cousin's face had gone completely black, and all I could see was the white in his eyes, kind of like the Cheshire Cat. Rainbow-like colours swirled in his face, and I remember saying, "Oh, this is good." There were echoes every time they spoke, and it felt as if my every move controlled the information coming into my mind. If I moved my body to the left, they would react and walk to my left. If I moved my body to the right, they would move to the right, etc. I waved my hands in the air in front of me, and I noticed I was controlling the crashing of the waves as if I was conducting them. The message here was that every move we make is connected to this matrix of life on the planet, as if all existence lives in one giant invisible web. I then felt like I was in an electric wire on a grid that connected me to everything that exists, including the planets and stars. It occurred to me that maybe I could drive the planet, as if it were my own spaceship, so I looked up at the stars and saw maps in the constellations. I united my hands in prayer form and pointed them at the sky, and suddenly I was taking the planet through the universe at unbelievable speeds. I drove us around other planets, asteroids, stars, and all the while I sensed that the overall message here was that with enough focused intention and concentration of love, humans could move the planet. During all this, a thought or feeling that I've had before kept creeping into my mind, and it reminded me that the One lives inside my mind and that people, animal, and plants recognise this energy in me. In those moments during the experience, this one feeling scared me because I couldn't tell if it was an egotistical thought that already resided in my mind, but towards the end of the trip I rejoiced in the overwhelming feeling that there is absolutely nothing in life to fear, not even death. And just as swiftly as my experience opened up, it ended, quite abruptly. I felt great afterward, as if I'd only just watched a 15-minute film on the existence of planetary life with thousands of years worth of information and messages fast-tracked into my consciousness. Blue by You, a DMT trip report by Blue Boy, uploaded to Erowid March 21st, 2004. Several years ago, I experimented with DMT. I was introduced to this chemical through a friend of mine who was heavily into shamanism. Over a 12-month period, I smoked it around 4 times, with ever-increasing doses. My friend recommended that I work my way up to the spirit dose. This was wise, because even in smaller doses, it can be a frightening experience. On my 5th journey, I found them, or more accurately, they found me. I've since read accounts from McKenna and Strassman's subjects. I guess my experience was similar, though I didn't perceive myself as being inside a structure. Rather, it seemed that the spirits were all around me. Wherever I looked, the swirling patterns transmogrified into these oscillating things which clearly acted independently of my own thoughts. At least that was the overwhelming perception I had. I can't really describe them. They were infinite in their complexity. I can see why people are convinced that they are these entities that are separate from their own minds. It's inconceivable that anyone can imagine such... I don't know what you'd even call them, or it. Anyway, I was there, wherever the hell it was, and all of a sudden each one of my fingers were connected to a spirit. Here's where it gets really strange. There were thousands of them near me now, and millions in the distance, though if I looked at the distant ones, they zoomed up close. So, next thing I know, each hand has thousands of fingers. I had complete control over each one. Like we can move our left index finger, I could control left finger 40,624. It was like I was a conductor. They were dancing and flying around in accordance with what I did with my super hands. Sound and sight seemed to merge and shift. I was conducting an orchestra of millions. There was a lot of other stuff too, but I've never been able to recall it. My final memory is being in absolute nothingness, except for one spirit. As I looked at it, it started to oscillate. So as I was looking at myself, or what I perceived was myself, I was changing form 1,000 times a second. The oscillations became faster, and the spirit wanted to know who it was. It wasn't asked in words, but I knew what the question was, somehow. I said, I don't know. This conversation went back and forth at an ever greater speed until, at the same time, we were both saying, "He is you, he is you." Then the words converged into hue. Literally, it was blue. I mean, I became the colour blue itself. A psychedelic play on words. I was a frequency. Then this spirit rushed up to me from the other side of the galaxy, laughing. He had a present, like a normal box with a blue ribbon, and he said, "What's your favourite hue?" Next thing I knew, I'd opened my eyes. The extra freaky element was that I had turned my head around and was looking straight out the window. At, you guessed it, a big clear blue sky. Once I'd met them, or myself, perhaps, I certainly don't ascribe to the literal idea that DMT is conducive to contacting aliens. I decided not to do DMT again. I have experienced total and absolute fucking out there, and I'd be scared that if I did it again, I wouldn't make it back. I don't think that there could be a more intense experience. However, I never imagined I'd experience what I did either. It's amazing, but a word of caution, it isn't a fun party drug. Some people want to go skydiving, and that's cool, but this was like being a Super Bowl bouncing around the universe. At the time, it really was too much. The final freakiness, at certain times of the morning or afternoon, I look at the sky and get this deja vu feeling. It's just the right shade of blue. The Fire from Within, a DMT trip report by BioBlog28, uploaded to Erowid September 27, 2004. I've always fancied myself a psychedelic adventurer, a believer in the mystical quality of the world surrounding us. In the footsteps of Huxley, Leary, Metzner, Alpert, McKenna, Castaneda and Strassman, to name a few of the pioneers, I walk with arms outstretched and wings unfurled, open to the multitude of experiences psychedelics have to offer. My use of psychedelics has been solely for the purpose of spiritual enhancement and mental discovery. I have tried almost all common substances with psychedelic properties, and have read as much literature on the topic as possible. My intent with any psychedelic journey is to make sense of a certain situation and/or a transformation amongst my mundane world. I have always found profundity, cosmological insight, and a sensibility that is derived from the intricate threads of wisdom woven within the tapestries of my body and the universe. This account I am about to give is purely in the realm of the mytho-poetic, and by this I mean as I write this I have only put together a few of the pieces that compose my DMT experience. My ability to reflect upon and extricate meaning from the experience can only be implemented through a poetic description because the experience was, well, poetic. Before I get to it, I want to set the stage. I've been planning this adventure for about a year now, always cautious about where my mental, spiritual, corporeal state is. I have had astrological advisors, polarity practitioners, craniosacral practitioners, and close friends alike talk with me about when and when not to take DMT. I have had friends who have had many experiences with DMT, and those with none, and I valued everyone's opinions, especially those closest to me. The only person, however, who knew when the best time to leap into the crack between worlds was me. Needless to say, my mundane life had taken quite the dramatic turn of events, and I had a dream that I took DMT and transformed into a panther, or some sort of large feline running through along a desert plateau. I identify with the feline archetype, and in Chinese astrology, I was born during the year of the tiger. When I have dreams such as this, I interpret them as a good omen, and a time to take a psychedelic trip. One of my best friends who personally made a batch of DMT invited me to his and his girlfriend's home on the beach to take the DMT leap. If there was anyone whom I could trust administering this drug to me, it was him, and the space that was offered to me was very warm and comfortable. We waited until twilight. Around 5:45 PM PST, we lit the room with candles, closed all curtains, and instilled the room with silence. I could not hear anything but a distant roll of ocean waves that were nothing less than soothing. As I do before any psychedelic journey, I practiced some very basic yoga stretches that I have learned from Bikram and Iyengar yoga, and after about 10 minutes of this I faced the north, west, south and east, and said a prayer for each direction. My safety, my ability to trust, my ability to find clarity, and for my capacity to retain wisdom and understanding. Those prayers firmly established my intent for this experience, and with humility and courage I sat down on the couch and let my friend administer the DMT, which he did with a glass pipe that had never been used. His girlfriend, who is also a close friend of mine, was in the room as well. Both would sit with me and hold space and make sure I was safe. The time was 6 PM, twilight, the crack between the worlds as it were. The first inhalation was deep, and I could taste a burnt musky scent incomparable to anything I have ever tasted before. I held in the smoke for nearly 15 seconds, exhaled and felt very light. Upon the second inhalation I felt very dizzy, and while I exhaled I fell back onto the couch lying horizontally. My pulse rate shot way up and I was extremely hot. Immediately I heard a cracking in my ears followed by a loud ringing that only lasted about 10 seconds. Silence. My body trembled and I began breathing deeply and heavily, letting out long sighs and moans. I visually witnessed the room disappearing like an evanescent footprint on the sand slowly being washed away by the tide. Then there was total and immense darkness, and as though I was propelled by some inexplicable force, my body was rocketed forward in a horizontal motion faster than anything I could comprehend. Swirls of light danced around me, and I saw particles of matter all around exploding into multicoloured fragments. The terror I initially experienced was unfathomable. I felt like I was dying and that I had no control whatsoever, and at once I surrendered to this death, and in a sense celebrated it. As soon as I did this, I saw a strange multi-limbed entity approach me on my left, swooping in and cradling my body as though I was an infant. It did not speak, nor do I remember anything other than it had many arms. It was very warm and non-threatening, and it spoke to me with its touch and nothing more. Its presence was extremely nurturing, and it smiled with such seraphic peace and benediction. The particles of light exploding around me, soft mercurial waves of colour enveloping me and draping me with care, muslin arms holding me gently, the universe expanding and contracting, angels dancing on effervescent stars, galaxies of light, sounds of butterfly wings burning, tendril tongues leaping like flames form a campfire, all derivations of geometrical patterns making reasonable the irrational. Dewdrops slipping off of buttercups, a warm desert breeze, a cactus field of great segueros and ox tongues swaying gently as sheets of stars pass above, careening archetypes appearing and disappearing in front of me. A Pirandelonian clown, a giant black horse with a honey-coloured mane, an archer with an inviting grin, fairies with dragonfly wings, a wizard with soft-spoken eyes, a lascivious young siren licking my chest with a long slippery buttermilk tongue, a Bengalian tiger with piercing luminescent eyes, an old man laughing, a young girl crying, an Indian inside a pueblo praying over a dying boy menstruating through his nostrils, an aft man on roller skates, and a crone in a purple shroud reaching her old withered hand to me. The whole of humanity dancing naked amongst the gods and goddesses of the storm. These images passed me by so fast, yet each intricate contour of their bodies I remember so clearly. This lasted for what seemed hours, and I calmly resigned to the incomprehensibly beautiful, changing aspect of the universe. The world runs by rhythms we cannot possibly comprehend, and to make peace with that is the essence of being human. This I felt like no other time in my life. No other experience was remotely close to this, and the whole time this presence, or perhaps God, the Great Spirit, was holding me in the warmest of embrace, and slowly it brought me back to my corporeal existence in the room on the couch, so gracefully and elegantly. My body felt like a lithe dandelion floating effortlessly back to the ground. I began laughing joyfully at the unbelievable nature of my experience. I felt like I now possessed an uncanny wisdom so powerful and so essential to my being that I retained a wonderful sense of self-confidence and peace. And as I opened my eyes, I saw the room as it once was before. There were strange geometrical patterns all around, yet I knew that I was back from wherever I went. My friends were there, smiling. I thought, my God, how long were they there? How could they have waited with me so long, so reserved and peaceful? Hours had passed, or so I thought. And to my amazement, looking at the clock, only 6 minutes, Earth time, had passed. I meditated for about 10 minutes and then slowly got up and walked around. My heart was still racing, but within 10 more minutes I was calm and collected. The only residual effect occurred about 8 hours later when I awoke with anxiety and in a pool of sweat. I had shivers and chills, and I immediately got in a warm bath and slowly regained my composure. I watched the sunset that morning from a bedroom window, and I felt a strong fire from within me that produced so much happiness and determination. This fire from within I had never experienced, and now that I have, it carries me forth into the world with speed, agility, and a sense that the universe is indeed incomprehensible, and that no mathematical formula, no graph, nor chart can possibly explain the infinitude and eternal changing manifestations of this endless flow of life. And this flow of life is joyous.